So an AI can analyze 20 chocolate brands and tell you everything about them, but it cannot tell you why people actually love that particular brand, right? And that's because AI can't experience it the way how humans can experience it. So that's why I'm not really worried about creativity as such and creatives being replaced by AI. But I do believe we're going to see a momentary blip of creativity being diminished by AI, and then a re-realization and a need for differentiation so that creativity is allowed to become more human again. Why is that? Because we are in an economical environment right now that has a lot of financial pressure.
I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is CPO Playbook, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. What happens when you buy 10 companies in 4 years and suddenly realize you've got 10 different cultures, 10 leadership styles, and 10 ways of doing business under one roof? That's the chaos Tim Ringel stepped into with Meet the People. He's scaled agencies from scrappy startups to global giants, invested in 200 plus companies, and seen every version of what works and what blows up. Tim, it's so great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here and excited for the conversation.
I especially like this conversation because, as you know, I have a background in working with a very large organization in your world. And so I'm really excited to hear everything that you have to share. So my first question to you is really around your background, because you've built and sold multiple agencies, some with thousands of people. So what's the shit moment that hits when a company scales past the founder's control?
Well, the oh shit moments happen literally every week. Even now, when, they have been happening for the last 29 years that I'm an entrepreneur. I think some of the beginning moments when you're younger, they feel like, oh shit, but when you look back, they actually weren't that bad. And, it's, well, okay, so you ask about my background, so let's go with the background first, and then we talk about the oh shit moments.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so I've been in the advertising industry now for nearly 30 years, 29 years. I'm turning 50 next year. So I started when I was 20. And that was more a coincidence because I really didn't know anything about the advertising industry. It's not like I studied it or I learned it. I was just a pretty nerdy 20-year-old who was in college and wanted to do something on the internet. That's how it started, like a lot of people did in 98 and 99. And I ended up building an agency because after trying to build a few, I would say, platform businesses in the first year, incubating my company, I realized it does need capital, it does need more people, and it's not that easy to do without money, and I had none. The easiest is always to sell your time when you have an abundance of it, but no product. So I started selling my time, and that meant basically helping companies with their websites, building websites. And, through building websites, I got into search engine optimization. And through search engine optimization, it became extremely hot in 99. I built a full service digital media agency, you could say, right? That was my first business. I was lucky enough, or sadly so, I sold the business after 12 years at 150 people and 7 offices in Europe. And then I had the fortunate surprise, and this was probably one of those oh shit moments, where I had the opportunity to do a reverse takeover of the company that bought my company. And that was a listed company headquartered in Paris. And I am German. And just for a fun fact, I had to repeat the 10th grade in school because of French. So there was this moment where I somehow inherited, I know how, but that would be too much for today, but I inherited this French listed company. And if my French teacher would have known, she would have probably, died instantaneously out of shock. And, before that, I never lived anywhere outside of Germany. And most of my business was in Germany or in German-speaking markets. So it was quite an interesting surprise. So I was 32 years old or something like that, and I was running a business with 17 locations across Europe and Asia, and that was an interesting learning curve, a very steep one. But I successfully, with my management team, scaled the business to 1,000 people, still listed in the stock market at the time. And then I wanted to conquer America because I already had at that time 25 offices in Europe, Middle East, and Asia. And the next logical step was America. I raised the idea with the board. The board loved the idea. I went to America to find a company to merge with because that's the easiest way to, get your footprint there. Brought home the idea of what company I would like to acquire and merge with, and delist my company in France, and then and that was the next oh shit moment where my board said, like, you know what, that's all great, but we changed our mind. Like, let's not do that. Let's sell the business you're running. And I was like, no. So I ended up selling my equity in the business and then moved to America without a business. It was very different again. So I think there's a lot of those moments when you build businesses and there's literally no predictability of what's going to be behind the next corner when you're an entrepreneur, but somehow it also is fascinatingly addictive, I would say. I came to New York, that's now 10 years ago, and initially wanting to start another agency. And then I got a call from Interpublic Group, one of the very large holding companies that I was fighting in Europe for so many years. And they said, why don't you work for us? And I said, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I don't think I fit very much into the culture. And they said, well, that's exactly what we are looking for. We were interested in buying your company and now you left. So why don't you just work for us? I'm like, yeah, great deal for you. Not so good for me. And I had this first US moment that I'm going to remember my entire life. I was in the room with some very senior executives and they just wrote some numbers onto a whiteboard, what my package would look like. And I was in shock. And I said, I'm going to start tomorrow. Like, this sounds great. Because and you probably know this as an entrepreneur, you don't even think about, I never thought about my salary. I never thought about life like that, right?
Right.
Being
Right.
employed. Like, I was never employed. Yes, I was technically employed because your company has to employ you eventually and pay taxes for it, right? But you don't really think about, like, I gotta pay myself a big salary and all these promises. And I'm like, okay, so this sounds awesome. Well, I figured if I work for Interpublic for 3 years, so I signed for 3 years and I learn a lot about the business that I don't know, but definitely learn a lot about the market I don't know. It's going to be helpful no matter what. And then they're going to pay me royally. And all of that did happen. They paid me royally. And I inherited a business there in the digital marketing space again. I inherited around 600 people, 800 people, something like that, and left after 3 years, as I had promised I would leave. And the business was 3,000 people in 60 plus offices around the globe. I learned so incredibly much that I decided I'm never going to do that again. But the learning curve the learning process was fantastic. I think it inspired me to, build what I'm building right now. But in between, before I started Meet the People, that's my company I've been building for 4 years, I wanted to tick one more box as a pursuit of knowledge, because I come very heavily out of digital media, meaning, I understand search, social, programmatic, affiliate marketing, like email, all that kind of stuff is what I grew up with. Call me a bit of an ROI nerd when it comes to that, return on investment nerd for advertising. So I had very little respect for creative, very little respect, because from my perspective, big creative Super Bowl ads, like, they don't actually sell product, right? You can't measure it. It's a disaster. Like, why would you spend $10 million just on buying a slot at the Super Bowl and then pay your agency another $1 million to make the ad and pay a celebrity another $1 million to be in the ad, and then you don't even measure what it sells, right? So that was my attitude towards creative. And when I was in IPG, I saw how powerful a pitch can be when you combine very, very deep media skills, my team had very deep media skills, with great creative thinking on the campaign side. And I've never seen that before because I came out of the performance marketing space. And I realized that these people in the room, and we pitched some billion-dollar brands when I was in IPG. As I said, I learned a lot. But these people were artificially put into that room. They weren't put into that room. They were brilliant, but they weren't put into the room because they really believed in being in the room together. They were artificially put in the room because IPG told them so. And I realized in that moment, I really have to learn about creative, because I feel if you have incredible creative in the room and you have incredible activation in the room, no matter if physical, digital, whatever, TV, whatever it is, this is insane. You're going to win every piece of business. So I decided after Interpublic, I decided to basically go to a very well-regarded creative agency that was focusing on luxury, because it's the most unmeasured creative space you can be in, right? But even though luxury brands grow every year, right? People love it. It made no sense. In my head, it made no sense. You pay so much money for creatives and models and beautiful people, and they don't measure at all how many people walk into a store. So I felt that that's something I want to understand. So I became global CEO of Spring Studios, a very regarded high-end luxury creative agency and production house, and with the ambition to teach them what media is and for me to learn what creative is. And that was in September 19, and the company was doing well. And then the pandemic hit, and the market collapsed for a year, but we didn't know how long it would collapse, right? So
Yeah.
in that period of time, it became a firefighting and restructuring and all the things that a CEO should go through once in their life, but definitely doesn't want to see again, right? Because before that, my career was primarily 20 years of consistent growth. It was because digital advertising always grew double digits. And my mantra was, if we are growing 10 or 15% year on year, we're actually shrinking because the market is growing more. So that was the attitude of all digital founders during that time in the ad tech space, martech space, ad agency space. And then you enter this super weird time where it's all about like, how do we survive? Something like that. The good news is pandemic ends eventually, right? As we all know now, it's going to be written like that in the history books. And so did we restructure the business, and the business recovered. And, lo and behold, the business is still around. But what I decided in that period of time was I really wanted to accelerate my idea of bringing the trades together, bringing creative together, content together with media, with activation, with experiential. I wanted to bring all the trades together, just like how I experienced it a little bit in Interpublic, but artificially forced. I wanted it organic. And this is how I came up with the idea to start Meet the People. I got some external capital to start the journey, and I started acquiring agencies in 2021 during the pandemic.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. Yeah, and Meet the People acquired 10 brands in 4 years, which is an incredible amount of different, again, leadership styles, leadership teams, and culture, ways of doing things. So what's harder? Is it merging the numbers, or is it merging the cultures?
Well, the culture, in the end, agencies live not off is the wrong word. Agencies exist because of people. No matter if it is on keyboard, on a whiteboard, on a drawing board, or because on the other side, there's clients who are people, right? No AI is buying our product yet. Okay. So you deal with people every day. It's a relationship, people business. And a lot of people shun on it and they're like, oh, it's SaaS is scalable, fintech is scalable. Yeah, but I actually deal with people every day. I kind of love it, So people in the ad industry, they love dealing with people. That's why they're there, So it's always the cultures that is motive. The numbers are not difficult. I always, and I think my team probably hates what I say all the time. I always say, like, if you have 10 million of revenue, you need to be an idiot not to make money. Like, because once the numbers get to a certain size, it is impossible to lose money if you are a decent operator, right? But
Right.
So that you don't have to really worry about the numbers. The numbers can always be better, and you can always optimize here and there. You can always grow more. Like all of that is just, it's part of business. But culture is what gets people excited. Culture is why people are around. Culture is why people don't leave, is why clients don't leave, is what makes your business better than another business ultimately. Yeah.
So how do you look when you look back, what's the single biggest people challenge that you've had to solve at trying to scale Meet the People?
Yeah, I mean, so the biggest challenge in scaling a business is merging those cultures, and we decided not to do that
Okay.
because
Okay. Yeah.
merging the cultures is extremely hard. I learned this. So think about, I mean, you know this, but maybe some of the listeners don't. So the United States, from my perspective, 50 states is like 50 different countries because you do have subcultures in each of the states. Yes, sometimes you have similarities, and yeah, you have, call it one, two languages, depending, right, on the fabric of those states. But ultimately, it's like 50 countries. Where I learned my principles about dealing with cultural integration, when you go to Europe and you have 25 offices in Europe, Middle East, and Asia, the cultural differences are even more vast because there's language difference. Well, Europe has been at each other's throat multiple times in history. So there is a lot of cultural differences, and compared to the United States, much, much, United States is much less complicated, right? So, but what I learned primarily there, and wasn't only me, it was my management team who's been traveling with me for 15 years now, across different companies. We've learned that some things like vision, mission, um, principles of ethics, they need to be aligned. But how you live that within the individual organization, you have to leave to the individual leadership team. Why? Because it feels like a top-down, non-authentic approach if you hand out handbooks for everything, right? It's just not authentic. So how I will Meet the People is I leave the individual agency leaders to implement the cultures they think within the guardrails of what Meet the People is, a people-centric business, that wants to break the mold and bring these traits together and be good to people, while we obviously also, a for-profit company. Within those bounds, we leave them a lot of freedom. What we have seen, what helps a lot is, even though you have individual companies and subcultures, you do bring people together on, for example, a tech platform where all those cultures can be celebrated and all those differences can be celebrated. So we implemented, now 3 years ago, we implemented what we call an HRS solution.
Hmm.
It functions not only as, payroll and all the infrastructure things, but it's like a social network where no matter where you are within the organization, and we have around 800 people, no matter where you are, where you work, what position you have, everybody's on the platform. And it's like a social stream where people just post post what's happening in their day, their birthdays, they post when they win a client, they post when they have a hardship. And it becomes this kind of like, call it like a, an insider version of a Facebook, right? Where people have their profiles and they share their learnings and they share their celebrations. And people see the different cultures. And I think that makes, that creates a lot of bonding between the different companies, besides the commercials and all the infrastructure IT things we do. But from an emotional perspective, you relate and you understand that those cultures have to be different. Why am I saying this? And then I'm going to give it a break. You can't force a pure, I don't want to say high performance culture, but high investment return culture onto a creative team. You Because creatives need space. They need space to think, space to breathe, space to make mistakes, space to ideate, not only physically, ideally, but also in their heads. Data analytics and those parts of the trade, right? They usually are more mathematical and more
Yeah.
structured and more process driven. So I strongly believe, and this is why we created this model with 10 brands, actually 11 if you count Meet the People as well as a brand, with 11 brands right now, where each of those brands hold a culture, but is kind of connected throughout the meet the people culture. And so far, so good. It seems to be working pretty well.
So you leverage technology to kind of create this melting pot, this virtual melting pot of multiple cultures is kind of what you've said so far, right? And I 100% believe that because I know the HR tech space fairly well, and I've seen that, firsthand when things really change.
Mm.
Um, there was something that you said, which is around creatives. Like creatives need space, they need time, they need space to make mistake. I think that that's really important. Not all companies do that, especially when you move over to the more, financially driven organizations or mathematical,
Hmm.
organizations. And I just think about AI coming into this world and what people need to be prepared for or what skills organizations and employers need to look for
Yeah.
in the future. And I think a lot about creatives because that's where originality comes in and AI is not doing that, at least not yet, as far as I know. I guess my question to you is, what do you think is important in regards to, bringing people together? You are the pretty much the master of doing this with multiple different types of agencies and bringing people together. But from those that may want to foster a more creative, um, original thinking organization, like what is your advice on that?
Well, what what creates creativity, right? So number one, to your point, AI is not yet ready to replace creativity, really at the core. And the reason for that, and I'm going to answer your question afterwards, the reason for that is that AI has no emotion or empathetic emotion to an experience, right? So when I love a brand that I grew up with as a kid, AI can analyze why people might like the brand, but then it cannot feel the emotion you feel. The memories of, I always make this example with a chocolate brand from Germany that I grew up with. And everybody who knows the chocolate brand knows how to open the package. You kind of crack it open like that, right? And it's luckily now a client of my group as well. So it makes me very happy. But this moment where you crack it open and you share it with your friends is completely a priceless moment, right? It kind of burns into your brain, into your emotions, into the connectivity to that brand. So an AI can analyze 20 chocolate brands and tell you everything about them, but it cannot tell you why people actually love that particular brand, right? And that's because AI can't experience it the way how humans can experience it. So that's why I'm not really worried about creativity as such and creatives being replaced by AI. But I do believe we're going to see a momentary blip of creativity being diminished by AI and then a re-realization and a need for differentiation so that creativity is allowed to become more human again. Why is that? Because we are in an economical environment right now that has a lot of financial pressures. And that is because of volatility and a lot of external factors. So every company is looking at their creative agency and vendors and suppliers and says, I need more for less. And that is goes hand in hand with economical volatility. Like there's a 5 to 10 year cycle where the CFO runs the show, and once the economy bounces back, the CEO runs the show again, and we're in the middle of the CFO cycle right now. So in those moments, everybody's going to look for efficiency, and AI is promising a lot of efficiency. So
Yeah.
we're going to see 2 years. That's my prediction. We're going to see 2 years where creativity is going to be undervalued. Um, and people think AI is going to be able to do everything, right? Why don't we just give it to AI? And then there's going to be a realization phase that if every brand uses the same large language models and, AIs, it's going to start all feeling the same, right? And there's no real ideas anymore. And we've seen this with, maybe you remember some of those Instagram filter apps, right? Where everybody was like downloading those filter apps, editing their videos and pictures, and we all looked the same. And eventually, most of the influencers went back and said, this is actually quite garbage. Like, I don't want to like fake all my pictures. I want to be more real. And that took 2 years. So I think we're going to go through a similar cycle when it comes to the impact of AI on creativity. I'm not saying that people not gonna be exposed to losing their jobs, because that's a real threat in this industry, especially when the job is more research heavy, more ideation heavy. But real creativity of coming up with a brilliant idea and a differentiating idea, I think that's always going to be human. So I just wanted to clarify that it's an important point to me, because otherwise I would give up on our industry at large, right? So I really believe that. But to your question, how do you foster creativity? And it's become really difficult, because people don't really realize that if you do not interact with people in person, your creativity kind of diminishes, because how creativity often works is an inspiring conversation, or you get exposed to something you've never been exposed to. And I think what was really helpful in the last few years, pre-pandemic, in pandemic, post-pandemic, was everything about diversity of people. I love that, because diversity of people means diversity of culture. Diversity of culture means diversity of signals. When somebody talks about, just to make a simple example, what they cook at home, a traditional dish from their country, from their grandma, whatever that is, it inspires thoughts. It inspires you to, I should really try this herb or this particular ingredients, right? And this is how creativity works. The more exposure you get to diversity, the more it spurs creativity. The more people, and as boring as a commute in a subway could be, but if you work remote 100% and you never use the subway, you never walk the streets, you don't actually get these signals. You don't get the signals, I'm being extreme. You don't get the signals of the season changing. You don't get the signals of what ads are actually in the subway, and, oh, this is like my client, just, wow, this is smart. And we are very much now primed to get digital signals, but it's so much clutter. It's so much garbage. So I really encourage people, respecting and understanding their living situations, that they want to work remote a few days, blah, 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 whatever that is. I encourage them to get out there and talk to their fellow colleagues, talk to people, be out and explore the world again. I think it's something that gets forgotten when you can spend 3 hours doom scrolling on TikTok, right? Gets forgotten. I'm not saying people don't find products on TikTok or inspiration on TikTok or Instagram. All fair. But I do believe sitting in the park and, seeing those people, it's some of the best ideas, happen in these moments. So
Just observation and exposure.
exactly. Travel, observation, exposure, new cultures, all of that, we have to do that as a company. I think it's our job to remind people how important that is, because it gets forgotten in such a volatile economical, political chaos, hype kind of society, I think. Right? So
Yeah.
sorry, that was very philosophical, but
We'll be right back. Back to the show. No, I think it was a perfect, I mean, whatever your response is a perfect response, because it was your perspective, and that's what we're here for. And I think to your point, I think one of the reasons why I love this show is because I intentionally look for different perspectives. I mean, I could have the same challenge being solved in 2 different episodes, and they'd be wildly different responses. And that is the point, right? And, I was just talking to someone about that leadership is really not this destination or a place to be or a specific definition. It's really just a journey, and everyone has a different journey of what their leadership looks like,
totally.
different context and different parts of the world, different goals and priorities. And there just is no one fit, one silver bullet, if you will.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I was thinking about, but yes, I have a lot to say always, but I don't want to lose the listeners with too much philosophy. But I think I always ask people to kind of like, it's very easy for us right now in what's happening in the world and at large in business and all that kind of stuff to judge those things, right? We're very quick to judge. And I think stepping back and trying to acknowledge the point of view of someone else And therefore then, think about it a little bit. We don't need to immediately blast a comment on the internet how shitty that thought was that someone has. We might want to step back, sit down, think a little bit, and then, acknowledge the other perspective. Because what I learned in life is that people only know what they know. We can't presume, and that goes for building businesses, it goes for hiring employees, it goes for the world, it goes for politics, it goes for everything. We can't assume that people have the same vantage point we have because we didn't grow up together. We didn't grow up the same way. Everybody has made different life experiences, however old they are. And going back to the advertising industry, that makes what we do so extremely human. Because when a creative or even a media planner comes up with something unique for a client, it's because of their journey in life. It's because of what they associate with the brand we're helping, right? So again, I want to leave it there from a philosophical point of view, but I went to a conference the last 2 days, and a digital marketing conference, and one of the very large global brands I sat down with and just had a chat asked me, like, so what is different about your business compared to, call it the other agencies out there? And I said, you know what? I think the only answer for you I have is we actually give a shit. And that's where I left it. And this was the head of global communications for an extremely large car manufacturer. because that's the difference. I think that's the philosophically for a business to actually care, because you care about your people, you care about longevity of your business, and you care about what happens to the client as a person, and you care about what happens to the brand in the long run. That is the difference.
It's something that's very interesting that you share because, we do a lot of research on, what leadership works in organizations. And this is a constant question that will never be answered fully, right? But I think that there often in my conversations from people on the show, like yourself, or with my clients, there is one theme that continues to pop up, and it's this authenticity and transparency of leaders, like the ability for people to truly tap in to what they want for the world and what they want for others. It comes out in like intuition, and people can see it. Like if it's not being said, obviously, and if it's not being visualized, like people can, I don't know how to explain it. It's like this aroma of this person truly cares about what they're doing. And if I believe that they care about what they're doing, they're not going to do me wrong. They're going to sell me something genuine. Like that's the feeling. And that's from leader to employee. That's from, leader to client. That's really like in most relationships. This is like, I feel like I'm having this epiphany in multiple ways and during this conversation, because that's truly what makes it different. And I think that the challenge is like, how would you make that more tangible for those who really do care?
And that's the hard part. And you know what the answer to that is?
Tell me.
Experiences together. They have to experience it. They have to experience that the words are connected to actions and that they are authentic. And I'm not saying, so again, do not misunderstand, right? A business is a business. So you're going to have to make decisions that are good for the business that sometimes might not be the best for your people. It happens, right? Because in the end, a business does have to, has to be viable as a business, because otherwise you can't employ people, right? So, so I'm not saying every decision I make or we make as an organization is the right decision. Everybody is allowed to make mistakes, and so do I, and so do we. But I think the more people get exposure to, oh, this guy actually said something and then he actually did it, like that's interesting. So what you build is trust, and trust is the ultimate currency in life from my perspective. So there's only really two at large. Again, I go into philosophy again. There's really only two things in life that really matter: is time and trust from my perspective. And they grow together, right? It's really interesting if you think about it. Number one, time we can't buy, right? It's finite. So you have to really always think about, do I want to spend time on this? Do I want to spend time with this person? is this a task I should be spending time on? And very quickly, a lot of people are going to realize, crap, I shouldn't actually do this, right? And the other one is trust. I've always tried to live by the rule that I really try to not burn bridges and screw over people on my path to what I want to be as a person. And I think for the most part, I have achieved that to the extent where I bump into people like the last 2 days that I have not seen for 10 years or 15 years. And we would love to work with each other again. But it doesn't come from, oh, you sold me something and the product was great. Like nobody cares what we talked about 15 years ago, how great the service was that we were providing. All they care about is, oh, this guy actually holds his promises and he
Yeah.
delivered, right? So that's, I think, if anything, if as a leader, I think these are the two ingredients that probably is the common thread in most. I'm not saying you can't be, how do you say, extremely well-trained, structured McKinsey, kind of like execute, find the weak spot, execute against it. Totally fine. But I do believe the person who does that is still very authentic with their character, right? So that's for me how that comes together. I think authenticity comes from trust and time investment into what you are good at or love and what you want to be, and then you are authentic. Because if you try to be someone you're not, it doesn't mean you can't change, right? But then you're never gonna really be authentic. I think some people just like everybody has this thing that makes them glow, even in their career, from my perspective. And it doesn't mean they have to stay there, but there is something they really would love to do and they're really good at. So I think if you find that in a person, then they're going to be very authentic and therefore very successful in it.
That's a good ending to our show. Find your glow.
Find your glow. Don't buy it and don't use a filter.
Yeah.
Find the real glow.
Well, Tim, this has
Great.
been such a fun conversation. There's very few interviewees that I have on the show that I can say, that we started and then we ended somewhere so different, but it was like so beautiful. Like we went to another beautiful land of those conversations. So thank you so much. This has been so great.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Visit us at cpoplaybook.com. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us, so thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn.